The cameras were rolling. The audience sat in their usual arrangement, some leaning forward, others with arms crossed, all watching the stage with that familiar mix of curiosity and judgment that comes with being part of a Dr. Phil taping. The studio lights were hot. The father sat in the guest chair, his hands gripping the armrest so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Across from him, his son stared at the floor, jaw clenched, refusing to make eye contact. Dr. Phil was mid-sentence, walking that fine line he'd walked 1,000 times before, pushing hard enough to break through denial, but not so hard that someone shuts down completely. He was asking the father about the last time he'd spoken to his son. 12 years. 12 years of silence between a man and the boy he'd raised. And then it happened. The father's voice cracked, his chest heaved, and Dr. Phil raised his hand toward the cameras and said, "Stop the tape." The room froze. Producers exchanged glances. Camera operators hesitated, unsure if they'd heard correctly. The audience, conditioned to react but never interrupt, held their breath. Dr. Phil didn't look at the cameras anymore. He didn't look at the audience. He looked directly at the father, whose face had collapsed into something raw and unguarded, and said quietly, "We're not doing this for ratings. We're doing this for you." That moment, that single decision to stop everything, wasn't in the show notes. It wasn't planned. It was pure instinct. And it was the moment that would change two lives forever. But to understand why that moment mattered, you need to understand how we got there. 3 weeks earlier, a producer named Sarah had opened an email from a young man named Marcus. The subject line was simple: "My father destroyed our family, and I need him to hear it." Sarah had read thousands of emails like this, stories of betrayal, abandonment, addiction, abuse. But something about Marcus's words felt different. They weren't vengeful, they were desperate. He didn't want revenge, he wanted closure. Or maybe he wanted his father back. He wasn't even sure himself. Marcus was 31 years old. His father, Robert, had walked out when Marcus was 19. No warning, no explanation, just gone. Robert had struggled with alcohol for years, and one night after a particularly brutal fight with Marcus's mother, he'd left and never come back. No calls, no letters, nothing. For 12 years, Marcus had carried that weight, the unanswered questions, the shame of telling people his father was not in the picture, the anger that would flare up at random moments, at weddings when fathers gave toasts, at family dinners where there was an empty chair, at Father's Day commercials that made his stomach turn. Sarah forwarded the email to Dr. Phil's senior team. They reached out to Marcus. Then carefully, they reached out to Robert.
Robert had remarried. He had a new life. He'd gotten sober 8 years ago. He had a stable job, a small house, a routine. And he had convinced himself that the best thing he could do for Marcus was stay away. He told himself that Marcus was better off without him, that reopening old wounds would only cause more pain. But when the show's team called, something shifted. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe deep down, Robert had been waiting for an excuse to reach out, but didn't know how. He agreed to come on the show. Subscribe and leave a comment because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. The taping day arrived. Marcus came in first. He sat in the green room, hands shaking, drinking bad coffee from a paper cup. A production assistant checked his microphone. Dr. Phil stopped by before the show started, as he often did. He sat down across from Marcus. No cameras, no audience, just two people talking. "Why are you here?" Dr. Phil asked. Marcus hesitated. "I don't know if I want an apology or if I just want to understand why he left." Dr. Phil nodded. "And if he can't give you either, then at least I tried." Dr. Phil studied him for a moment, then said, You're braver than you think. Robert arrived separately. He looked older than his 53 years. The years of drinking had left their mark, even though he'd been sober for nearly a decade. He wore a button-down shirt that was slightly too big, jeans that were slightly too worn. He looked like a man who'd spent a long time trying to disappear. When he sat down in his own green room, a different production assistant asked him the same question Dr. Phil had asked Marcus. "Why are you here?" Robert's answer was quieter. "Because I owe him that much." The show began the way it always did. Dr. Phil's voice filled the studio, warm and authoritative, introducing the topic. Today we're talking about fathers and sons, about the damage that silence can do, about whether it's ever too late to say you're sorry. The audience applauded. Marcus walked out first, sitting in the chair under the lights. Dr. Phil asked him to tell his story. Marcus spoke haltingly at first, then with growing confidence. He talked about his childhood, about the good years before the drinking got bad, about the fights, about the night his father left, about the 12 years since. The audience was silent. Some nodded, a few wiped their eyes. Dr. Phil listened without interrupting, a skill he'd honed over decades, knowing when to push and when to just let someone be heard. Then Dr. Phil said, "Your father is here today. Are you ready to see him?" Marcus's face went pale. He nodded. Robert walked out from backstage. The audience watched him cross the stage, every step heavy with the weight of a dozen years. He sat down in his own green room. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just looked at each other. Two strangers who used to be everything to one another. Dr. Phil started gently. He asked Robert to explain what had happened, why he left, why he stayed away. Robert's answers were careful, rehearsed almost. He talked about his alcoholism, about how ashamed he'd been, about how he thought leaving was the right thing to do, about how the longer he stayed away, the harder it became to come back. Marcus listened, but his face was unreadable. Dr. Phil pressed harder. "You say you thought it was the right thing to do, but did you ever ask Marcus what he needed?" Robert faltered. "No." "Did you ever think that maybe he needed his father, even a flawed one, more than he needed you to be perfect?" Robert's voice dropped. "I didn't think I deserved to be in his life." Dr. Phil paused mid-sentence. The studio went completely silent. It wasn't what Robert said. It was how he said it. The crack in his voice, the way his hand started trembling, the way he looked at Marcus, really looked at him for the first time since sitting down. And Dr. Phil, who'd done this 1,000 times, who'd navigated every kind of human pain imaginable, felt something shift in the room. This wasn't a conversation anymore. This was a man on the edge of breaking open. Dr. Phil raised his hand toward the cameras. "Stop the tape." The room froze. Producers in the control room exchanged confused looks. Camera operators glanced at each other. The audience sat perfectly still, unsure what was happening. This wasn't part of the show. This wasn't scripted. Dr. Phil turned to Robert and said quietly, but firmly, "We're not doing this for ratings. We're doing this for you." Robert's face crumpled. His shoulders shook. And for the first time in 12 years, he looked at his son and said, "I'm sorry." But the words barely made it out. His voice broke halfway through. He tried again. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I'm so sorry." Marcus didn't move. His jaw was still clenched. His arms were still crossed, but his eyes were wet. Dr. Phil leaned forward. "Robert, I need you to understand something. Saying I'm sorry isn't enough. You need to tell him what you're sorry for. Not in general terms. Specifically, what did you take from him?" Robert wiped his face with the back of his hand. He took a shaky breath, and then slowly the words started coming. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you graduated high school. I'm sorry I didn't teach you how to drive. I'm sorry you had to figure out how to be a man without me. I'm sorry I made you feel like you weren't worth staying for. Each sentence hit Marcus like a physical blow. His arms uncrossed, his shoulders dropped, and then, finally, he spoke. You made me think I did something wrong, Marcus said, his voice raw. For 12 years, I thought maybe if I'd been a better son, you wouldn't have left. Robert shook his head, tears streaming down his face. No, God, no. You were never the problem. I was. Dr. Phil let the silence sit for a moment. Then he did something he almost never did. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Robert. This, Dr. Phil said, is a letter Marcus wrote to you 5 years ago. He never sent it, but I think you need to read it now. Robert's hand shook as he unfolded the letter. The cameras, still technically off, hovered nearby. The audience watched, breathless. Marcus stared at the floor, unable to look at his father's face as he read. The letter was short, just a few paragraphs, but every word was a wound laid bare. Dad, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't even know if you care, but I need to say it anyway. I miss you. I hate that I miss you. I hate that part of me still hopes you'll come back. I hate that I look for you in crowds. I hate that I can't move on. But more than anything, I hate that I don't know why you left. Was it me? Was it Mom? Was it just the drinking? I need to know, because not knowing is killing me. If you ever get this, just tell me why. That's all I need. Marcus. Robert finished reading. He folded the letter carefully, hand still shaking, and placed it on his lap. He looked at Marcus, and for the first time there was no defensiveness in his expression, just raw, unfiltered pain. I got sober 8 years ago, Robert said quietly, and every single day since, I've wanted to call you. But I didn't know what to say. I thought I'd done too much damage. You did, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. But you did more damage by staying gone. Dr. Phil leaned back in his chair, watching the two men. He glanced at the production booth, then back at Robert and Marcus. He made a decision. We're not going back on camera yet, Dr. Phil said. I want the two of you to talk. Really talk. Not for the show, not for the audience, just for you. He stood up and walked off stage. The audience remained frozen, unsure what was happening. Producers scrambled to figure out how to handle the unplanned break. But Dr. Phil didn't care about logistics. He cared about what was happening on that stage. For the next 20 minutes, Robert and Marcus talked. The cameras stayed off. The audience stayed silent. And slowly, painfully, two people who'd been strangers for 12 years started to become father and son again. They didn't fix everything. 12 years of pain doesn't heal in 20 minutes. But something shifted. Marcus asked questions. Robert answered them honestly this time, without the rehearsed deflections.
They talked about the night Robert left, about the drinking, about the guilt, about the silence. And then finally, Marcus said the words he'd been holding back. I don't forgive you yet, but I want to try. Robert nodded, tears streaming down his face again. That's more than I deserve. Dr. Phil returned to the stage. He signaled to the crew. The cameras came back on. The audience stirred, unsure what they were about to witness. Dr. Phil sat back down and looked at both men. We're going to finish this now, he said. But before we do, I want to say something. What just happened here, this is why I do this show. Not for the drama, not for the ratings. For moments like this, when people choose courage over comfort. when they choose honesty over hiding. He turned to the audience. What you're about to see is real, and it's messy, and it's uncomfortable, but it's also hope. The rest of the taping was different from any Dr. Phil episode before or since. There was no confrontation, no dramatic reveals. Just two men sitting across from each other, trying to rebuild something that had been broken for a very long time. Dr. Phil asked Marcus what he needed from his father moving forward. Marcus said he needed consistency. He needed Robert to show up, not just once, but over and over again. He needed proof that this wasn't just a TV moment, but a real commitment. Dr. Phil asked Robert if he could do that. Robert said he would try. Not perfectly, but he would try. Before they wrapped, Dr. Phil did something he rarely does. He reached out and placed a hand on each man's shoulder. "This isn't the end," he said. "This is the beginning, and beginnings are hard, but you've already done the hardest part. You showed up." The audience applauded, but it wasn't the usual enthusiastic applause. It was quieter, more reverent, like they just witnessed something sacred. After the taping, Marcus and Robert stood awkwardly near the stage, unsure what to do next. A production assistant handed Robert a business card, a therapist who specialized in family reconciliation. Dr. Phil had arranged it in advance, just in case. "Use it," Dr. Phil said, walking over. "Both of you. This isn't something you can do alone." Marcus nodded. Robert took the card, his hand still shaking slightly. As they left the studio, Marcus turned to his father. For the first time in 12 years, he extended his hand. Robert looked at it, then pulled his son into an embrace instead. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. 6 months later, Dr. Phil received a photo. It showed Marcus and Robert at a baseball game, both smiling. On the back, in Marcus's handwriting, were 3 words: "We're still trying." That letter Robert read on stage, the one Marcus never sent, now sits framed in Robert's living room, a reminder of the silence that almost destroyed them, and the courage that brought them back. Dr. Phil keeps a copy in his office, not as a trophy, but as proof that sometimes stopping the cameras is more important than anything that could ever be captured on film. Because some moments aren't meant for television, they're meant for healing.